Deion Prime Time. Sanders made a career shutting down the NFL's biggest stars, but at 57, he finally reveals the toughest players he ever faced, and some of the names will shock you. The legend of prime time. From the second Deion Sanders stepped into the NFL, you could feel the change in energy. No one could classify it as just another rookie walking onto the field in 1989. It was prime time, and he lit up the stadium before the game even started with his gold chains, high steps, and swagger. Fans tuned in because they knew something wild might happen when number 21 was out there. Deion announced himself on day one. In the first game of his rookie season, he fields a punt, makes a few defenders miss, and suddenly, he's gone. 68 yards later, he's in the end zone, high-stepping, and the crowd was going crazy. That was his introduction into the game, and the league had no idea it was about to deal with a human highlight reel for the next decade and a half. And the thing is, cornerbacks weren't supposed to be stars. The glory usually went to quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. Deion flipped that script, and he brought shine to a position that used to be in the shadows. He did more than just cover receivers. He practically erased them. Quarterbacks didn't even bother throwing to his side of the field. Imagine being so good you shut down an entire game plan. That's how special Deion was. One of the most famous examples happened in 1994 when he joined the San Francisco 49ers. That year, he picked off 6 passes and returned them for a record-setting 303 yards, including a 93-yard touchdown against his former team, the Atlanta Falcons. That season ended with a Defensive Player of the Year award and a Super Bowl ring, which cemented his reputation as the ultimate shutdown corner. But it wasn't only in defense that he was the big bad wolf. Anytime Deion touched the ball, fans held their breath. The man turned defense into offense in the blink of an eye with his kick returns, punt returns, and interceptions. In total, he scored 22 non-offensive touchdowns in his career, a record that stood for years and showed how dangerous he was every time the ball found his hands. And the most incredible thing is that while he was doing all that in the NFL, he was also out there playing Major League Baseball. He played with the Yankees, Braves, Reds, and the Giants. Who else in this era could finish an NFL game on Sunday and then step into a playoff game for the Braves during the week? In 1992, he literally played in an NFL game and an MLB postseason game in the same week. That's superhero stuff. During that same postseason, he batted .533 for the Braves in the National League Championship Series, proving he wasn't just a novelty athlete, but a real contributor at the highest level of baseball. By the time he retired from football in 2005, the resume was stacked. He had 2 Super Bowls, 8 Pro Bowls, and Defensive Player of the Year under his belt. And, of course, that gold jacket in Canton. But numbers only tell part of the story. Deion gave kids new things to dream about when it comes to the game. Before him, nobody wanted to be a corner, but after him, kids on playgrounds were yelling, "I'm prime time," while locking down their friends in backyard football. He literally made defense cool. However, even with how amazing Deion was, what made him unforgettable was not only because of the statistics or the jewelry he loved showing off, it was the show he put on, the trash talk, his high steps, and the celebrations. He gave football personality in such a way that you couldn't take your eyes off him, whether you loved him or hated him. Still, for all the flash, Deion respected the grind. He knew greatness wasn't built on highlights alone. And as confident as he was, he never shied away from admitting who pushed him. The truth is, even the best corner in history had battles that tested him. Think about it. The 1990s and early 2000s were loaded with legendary wideouts. Week after week, Deion lined up across from guys who forced him to dig deeper, play smarter, and bring his absolute best. And that's where the story really gets good, because if you want to understand how great Deion was, you have to look at the players who made him sweat. The ones who made primetime sharpen every part of his game. Wide receivers who tested his limits. At the very top of that list is Jerry Rice. If you've followed football for even a second, you know the name. The greatest receiver the game has ever seen. The man who owns records that may never be touched. When Deion faced Rice, it was a showcase of 2 players who knew how to play their positions. Rice wasn't the biggest, nor was he the fastest, but his precision was brutal. His route running was like clockwork. Every cut and every step was measured to perfection. There's a reason Deion has said many times that Rice was his toughest matchup. Rice had a way of wearing you down. Most receivers take plays off. Not Jerry. Every snap, he came at you like it was 4th and goal. For a guy like Deion, who thrived on confidence, that was exhausting. You couldn't blink, relax, or let your mind wander for even a second because Rice would find the opening. Think back to those clashes between the San Francisco 49ers and the Atlanta Falcons in the early 90s. Rice and Deion lining up against each other was box office football. Fans in the stadium would lean forward, knowing something was about to happen. It didn't matter if the ball went their way or not. Just the sight of Rice breaking off the line and Deion shadowing him step for step was enough to electrify the crowd. And the beauty of those duels was that sometimes Rice got the better of Deion and sometimes Deion shut him down. That's what made it real and even more fun. Deion has admitted that Rice's work ethic and consistency forced him to prepare in ways he never had before. He couldn't rely on speed alone, so he had to study film, learn tendencies, and anticipate things 2 steps ahead. In that way, Rice did more than test Deion's athleticism, he also tested his discipline. And Prime himself will tell you, that was the challenge that made him sharper. Now switch gears to a different type of battle, which he had with Michael Irvin. If Rice was the surgeon, Irvin was the street brawler. Their showdowns in the NFC East when Deion was with Washington, and especially in the Cowboys-49ers rivalry, were the stuff of legend. Irvin was known for lining up and running routes, but more than that, he fought you, clawed, shoved, and leaned his entire body into every catch. Deion has often said that Irvin's physicality made him one of the hardest receivers to cover. You couldn't just glide and stride with him. You had to absorb punishment and then dish it back. And it wasn't just the physical side. Irvin played with passion. He was the emotional heartbeat of the Cowboys. And when he faced Deion, the energy was electric. There are clips of the two jawing at each other, shoving after the whistle, refusing to back down. Irvin wanted to prove that toughness could break speed, while Deion wanted to prove that finesse could beat power. And when the ball was snapped, the stadium held its breath, because those were heavyweight rounds and shoulder pads. Plus, one of the reasons why the Irvin matchups are so memorable is that Deion couldn't just rely on technique. He had to match Irvin's willpower, and as much as they were enemies on the field, off the field, Deion has always spoken with deep respect for Irvin, because anyone who made you fight that hard earned your admiration. Another player that tested Deion was Randy Moss. By the time Moss hit the NFL in 1998, Deion was already a legend, but even he couldn't ignore the impact Moss made. Moss was unlike anything the league had ever seen. 6'4", blazing speed, and insane leaping ability. He terrorized defenses, and while Deion caught Moss toward the back end of his career, he's been honest about the fact that Moss was terrifying to defend. Deion said Moss could take over a game with just 2 catches. He didn't need 10 receptions to rack up 150 yards, 1 deep ball, 1 highlight grab, and he had changed everything. For a cornerback, that kind of explosiveness was a nightmare. And even for someone like Prime, who thrived on taking away the deep ball, Moss still demanded absolute perfection on every snap. Deion has admitted that Moss's mix of size and speed was something the league hadn't seen before, and the fact that Prime himself gave Moss that level of respect tells you everything you need to know, because Deion never handed out compliments lightly. But it wasn't just Rice, Irvin, and Moss. Deion has also praised Cris Carter, a receiver whose hands were legendary. Carter wasn't the fastest guy on the field, but if the ball was anywhere near him, you could count it as a completion. Deion said Carter had a knack for making contested catches look routine. Covering him was like trying to guard a magician. You knew what he was about to do, but stopping it was another story. There was also Sterling Sharpe, who performed wonders during plays. Before injuries cut his career short, Sharpe was an absolute force for the Green Bay Packers. He was big, physical, incredibly smart, and could outmuscle you on one play and outthink you on the next. Deion has mentioned that Sharpe knew how to set traps. He studied defenses, knew their weaknesses, and played like a man determined to exploit them. Prime respected that, because Sharpe wasn't just gifted, he was dangerous because of how he used his brain to complement his talent. What ties all of these names together is the fact that Deion, the man who never lacked confidence, openly acknowledged their greatness. He wasn't afraid to admit they pushed him to the edge, and that is just admirable, Behind the bravado and the celebrations was a competitor who understood that iron sharpens iron. Deion himself has said that going up against these receivers forced him to be more than just a freak athlete. He had to become a student of the game. He had to study tendencies, learn quarterback rhythms, and master every detail of footwork. And in his own words, that process made him better, because greatness doesn't grow in a vacuum, but grows when you're tested. But these awesome players weren't the only ones who tested Deion's grit. Quarterbacks, return men, and all-around competitors. Quarterbacks usually played it safe when they saw Deion Sanders lined up on defense. They looked the other way, checked down to a running back, or avoided the risk completely. Still, there were a few legendary arms that had no problem testing him. Those moments created some of the most memorable showdowns in football. Joe Montana stood out among them. Montana was not reckless at all, but was calm, steady, and sharp. He understood that a mistake against Deion could end a drive in seconds, yet he still trusted his ability to fit the ball into impossible spaces. Watching Montana and Deion face off was like watching two masters trade moves in a high-stakes chess match. Every throw carried weight, and every route mattered. Fans knew they were witnessing two of the smartest players of their generation trying to outthink each other on the field. Troy Aikman was another quarterback who found himself battling Deion often. Playing in the NFC East with the Cowboys meant seeing Deion's Falcons twice a year. Aikman had Michael Irvin as his main target, and even when Deion blanketed him, Aikman refused to give in. He kept throwing Irvin's way, believing in his receiver's ability to fight through. Those games had an intensity that felt different. Aikman's willingness to challenge Deion did not always pay off, but it made the rivalry unforgettable. Fans could sense the pride on both sides. Aikman wanted to prove his team could stay aggressive, and Deion wanted to prove that even the best connection in football could be locked down. Brett Favre brought a completely different energy to the field. Favre was fearless to a fault, and he believed his arm was stronger than any corner's coverage. That belief often pushed him to test Deion more than most quarterbacks ever dared to. Sometimes it worked, as Favre's throws could rocket past before Deion closed in. Other times, Deion flipped the game on its head with a sudden interception. With Favre, there was no middle ground. Every ball he sent in Deion's direction carried the possibility of disaster or brilliance. That unpredictability made their matchups thrilling for everyone watching. But quarterbacks were not the only ones who stood out in Deion's memory. Special teams brought their own kind of rivalry, and for Deion, returning kicks and punts was another stage to shine. He could flip a game in seconds with one burst of speed. Then there was Devin Hester, years later, who brought that same electricity. Hester did more than just return kicks. He changed how teams approach special teams strategy. Opponents often chose to kick away from him, just as they once had with Deion. Watching Hester dominate the return game reminded everyone of what Deion had done a decade earlier. It was like seeing the baton passed, one electric playmaker to another. Few athletes left a mark on Deion the way Bo Jackson did. Bo was not only strong and fast, but explosive in a way that looked unreal. Watching Bo charge through defenses left opponents stunned. For a cornerback like Deion, who relied on speed and precision, seeing an athlete who combined raw power with elite speed was unforgettable. Bo was a rare case of an athlete who looked like he could do anything. On Sundays, he ran over defenders, and on other days, he crushed baseballs out of stadiums. For Deion, who also juggled both sports, Bo reminded him of how unique true versatility could be. What tied these names together was their fearlessness. Montana, Aikman, and Favre did not always win their battles with Deion, but they refused to shy away. Hester forced teams to hold their breath every time he touched the ball, just as Deion once did. Bo Jackson looked like a force of nature, and facing him felt like facing a highlight reel waiting to happen. They represented the kind of competition that sharpened Deion's edge. Every one of them brought out a different test, and those tests are what made the memories last. Every great player leaves the game with lessons that go far beyond wins and losses. For Deion, those lessons came from testing himself against legends. Facing exceptional players and going up against true protégés brought indispensable knowledge and lessons. One of the first lessons was preparation. Deion built his career on speed, instinct, and confidence, but he knew talent alone was not enough against players like Rice. Jerry studied film endlessly. and his routes were as precise as clockwork. To keep up, Deion had to match that dedication. It was not enough to run fast, so he had to understand tendencies, learn body language, and anticipate where the ball was going before it was even thrown. Those hours of study sharpened him into more than a gifted athlete. They turned him into a complete defender. Another lesson he learned was toughness. Michael Irvin demanded physicality on every snap. He fought through coverage, battled for position, and played with a level of intensity that never dipped. Deion, who was known for finesse and speed, had to meet that challenge head-on. Covering Irvin was not only about quick feet, it was about mental strength and refusing to break, even when the game turned into a war of endurance. That experience showed Deion that greatness was not always flashy. Sometimes it was about grit. Randy Moss, on the other hand, revealed a different kind of lesson. His athleticism pushed Deion to respect the next generation. Even in the later years of his career, Deion realized that football was always evolving. A new wave of talent would come, with skills that tested even the most accomplished veterans. Moss's ability to leap, sprint, and dominate with ease reminded Deion that staying humble and adapting was just as important as past success. No matter how much he had achieved, there was always someone coming who could force him to adjust. From quarterbacks, Deion learned patience. Montana's calmness under pressure, Aikman's steady hand, and Favre's reckless courage all forced him to sharpen his discipline. He could not bite on every fake or rush every play. He had to pick his moments, trust his technique, and stay locked in. Those lessons influenced his ability to remain consistent for more than a decade in the league. Special teams battles and the rise of players like Devin Hester reminded him of legacy. Deion had been the face of highlight reel returns. The player fans expected to light up the field the moment the ball touched his hands. Watching Hester repeat those feats years later showed him how influence passes down. The game always produces a new showman, but the foundation laid by the first wave never disappears. Deion learned that his impact was not just in his own plays, but in how others carried the torch forward. Finally, there was Bo Jackson, who represented possibility. Seeing an athlete excel in two sports at such a high level gave Deion perspective. He understood what it meant to push boundaries. Bo proved that limits are often illusions, and Deion carried that belief into his own two-sport career. The lesson was that greatness often comes from refusing to accept the idea of impossible. Now, at 57, Deion often thinks about what those battles taught him. They might have been electrifying games, but they were also classrooms. Preparation, toughness, humility, patience, legacy, and belief in possibility all came from the competition he faced. Those values guide him today as a coach at Colorado, where he passes them on to the next generation. His players hear stories of Jerry Rice, Michael Irvin, Randy Moss, and Bo Jackson, but more importantly, they hear the lessons behind those names. So, who do you think was Deion's toughest matchup of all time? And if Prime Time played in today's NFL, which receiver do you think could give him the biggest challenge? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. You don't want to miss what's coming next.